centering community partners in decisions, design, and development. My name is Sharla Horton-Williams, and until last year, I had no idea what BRT and TLD and all the other letters that you all use all the time. Because unlike most of you, I am not a transit professional, but I am really, really passionate and in love with the city where I have lived, worked, and played for 40 years. I am from Fort Worth, Texas. So I'm really, really excited, though, to have these amazing transit professionals who are going to navigate this space, help us navigate this space of community engagement and partnerships today. So I'm going to start by introducing each of them very briefly. Zack Deutsch-Gross joins us from the Bay Area in California. He leads Transform's political advocacy and grassroots community partnerships, in addition to managing the community organizing team. And for Zack, transit is not just about getting from A to B, but it's a fundamental way that we engage with each other and create a more equitable, connected, and sustainable city where everyone has a right to belong and thrive. Thank you for being here today, Zack. Next to me is Yasha. Yasha Zarrinkelk currently serves as the Advocacy Director of Transit Forward Philadelphia, a coalition of over 24 community organizations advocating for safe, accessible, sustainable transit improvements within the greater Philadelphia region. He's invested in community efforts that empower BIPOC and low-income residents to reclaim space and take ownership and control of their communities through dignified, fair, and effective transit and land use policies. Paige Dickerhoof joins us from Raleigh, North Carolina. Her experience is centered around equitable public engagement and multimodal transportation planning. Paige has worked with numerous state and city agencies to implement equitable public engagement practices that in turn contribute to equitable planning projects. And last but not least, Evian Patterson is Assistant Transportation Director for Mobility Services in the city of Durham, also from North Carolina. Evian oversees the transit and parking divisions. It has over 10 years experience in transportation planning and operations, including recently managing the Go Durham Better Bus Project, a comprehensive effort to improve transit services and infrastructure citywide. A brief round of applause for our panelists today who are going to share both their experience and expertise in the areas of community partnerships and engagement. Before we get too far, there's nothing on my screen, so I have no idea what I'm supposed to say next. And y'all do not want me to randomly ramble, trust me. So I have pressed the green button. And if there's something else I need to do, just, oh, it's over there. There were introductions, good. While they do that and get us some direction, let's start with just an opening question that maybe each of you can answer. Let's just frame this whole conversation. First of all, kudos to the previous panel in the 8 o'clock session, because they really did just set us up for a great conversation. But why is my big question? Why is it so important to even consider community partnerships when we're thinking about transit planning and development? Let's start with Zack.
Thanks, Sharla. And it's really great to be here with all of you and everyone online. For me, community partnerships are a way to have a better understanding of transit planning and decision-making, center the communities that are most impacted by these decisions in the planning from day one. And it's also just fundamental to building trust that is important to serving the people we want to serve in the work we do.
Thank you. Yasha, what would you add to that?
Yeah, I feel that transit riders are the real and true experts of the system. We can have all of the accolades of master's degrees and, experiences and titles, but our riders and the customers are the true experts. And I think in order to get real deep and insightful feedback from the actual experts of the system, it's knowing the community and building those relationships. And that I think that trust that Zack was talking about, it's a dynamic that goes back and forth, that the riders want to be able to feel trusted in the agency, and the agencies should be able to feel like they can trust the riders too to get that feedback.
Thank you.
We are in the people business. We often overlook that. We get so focused on the planning, the engineering, that we forget who we're truly serving. And so when remembering that we are in the people business, people need to be involved. And especially people that understand the unique challenges and opportunities for their communities. They have the insight that often we don't have as planners or engineers. So they need to be involved at every step of the way.
It's a great question. Really, we're collaborating with the community helps us ask the right questions. Really gets at, what are the things that are impacting community members and their lives and their lived experiences so that we can reimagine infrastructure and build better transportation options and access for residents and community members, and without making the same mistakes as we have been in traditional planning processes. So it's important to do that and recognize that they bring value to the process.
Yeah, I love that. The people bring value to the process. We're going to have a few brief presentations. Each one of our panelists will share details about a recent project or initiative in which they centered community partnerships, engaged deeply with their community to achieve an intended outcome. At the end of the 3 presentations, we'll have some time for question and answer. So if you have specific questions for specific panelists, please be sure to note those. And I also want to say welcome and hello to our virtual audience today, and we will not forget about you. Please know that you will also have an opportunity to engage with our panelists at the end during the question and answer session. We're going to start with Yasha. Yasha is from Transit Forward Philly, and he's going to tell us a little bit about a recent project, the Rider-Driven Bus Survey.
Thank you so much, Sharla. Hi, everyone. My name is Yasha Zarrinkelk. As Sharla kind of already mentioned, I'm the Advocacy Director of Transit Forward Philly, and I'll be talking about a rider-driven bus network survey that we did as part of our Better Access, Better Service, Better Buses campaign. Just to kind of give a brief little overview of who we are before I kind of get into our campaign. Transit Forward Philly is an independent advocacy coalition that was formed about 2 years ago. We are a separate and independent advocacy organization, separate from our transit agency, SEPTA, but we do work very, very closely and partner very, very closely with the transit agency. We kind of play sort of an inside-outside game with the transit agency in that we partner with them in terms of getting the word out on specific campaigns that either projects that they are working on, or if we are going to be doing some sort of action like, getting riders to a station, we will kind of give them a heads up about some of the work that we do. There's a really valuable and important relationship, I think, in transit agencies working with transit advocates, because like I was earlier kind of saying, transit riders are kind of the experts of the system. And I think it's really important that transit agencies are actually able to listen and hear from riders directly, as well as community organizations. So we're made up by about 24 community organizations, and we're made up of organizations that don't necessarily represent transit specifically. I think they're kind of groups that I would like to call kind of transit adjacent, but I think it's really important to note that everything essentially intersects public transit and when it comes to healthy community development, and that involves access to affordable housing, healthcare, jobs, education, and you name it. So our groups are made up of labor unions, senior and elderly rights groups like AARP, and then of course your run-of-the-mill environmental justice groups. And we're a 501c3 organization that is actually funded by a really, really great organization called Transit Center, which is a national kind of think tank philanthropy advocacy organization. So I want to talk about a little bit about 1, our campaign, and then 2, kind of what SEPTA is working on currently and why we kind of started our campaign. So SEPTA back in fall of last year started a comprehensive bus network redesign process where they hired Nelson Nygaard to kind of be the primary consultant. And this was really, really critical and really, really important because our bus network had not been redesigned in over 30 years. And some of the routes that our bus network were designed for were still following like horse-drawn carriages that were designed like years and years and years ago. In addition to that, SEPTA's bus ridership was steadily declining by like 9% between 2014 to 2017, like even prior to the pandemic. And that's because the buses were moving at a very, very slow speed, and the reliability and the frequency of SEPTA buses weren't where the agency wanted them to be. So riders were no longer seeing the buses as kind of like a viable form of public transportation, which is really unfortunate because the bus is actually one of the most kind of versatile and accessible forms of public transit, and it can get places where like kind of high-speed commuter rail necessarily can't. So there was a need to redesign the bus network. So it was really, really important. And at this time too, bus ridership was declining, yet the population of the city of Philadelphia was increasing. So it was kind of like it was really the bus system and the bus network that needed to be changed. So we at Transit Forward Philly launched a better access, better service, better buses campaign, which was essentially calling upon SEPTA to transform their current bus service to be faster, more frequent, and more reliable, but also connecting communities in a safe and dignified manner. I think that's something that we really wanted to emphasize was this idea of the dignity of riders and not just providing them kind of like a basic service of getting them from point A to point B, but also making them feel like public transit was a viable and affordable and accessible and also a nice and convenient way to get where they need to go. And isn't just something that is, something that they just need to do to get to from point A to point B, essentially. So as part of our Better Access, Better Service, Better Buses campaign, we conducted a bus network survey to essentially understand what riders' kind of tolerance for change to the bus network would be, which is essentially inherent to there are a lot of changes that happen when you do a bus network redesign, especially when it comes around trade-offs like bus stop consolidation, or route consolidation. So we wanted to make sure and understand, okay, what are a rider's kind of tolerance for change to the bus network? And it was something you don't know about Philadelphians. They do not like change whatsoever at all. Even if it's good for them, they don't want it to be changed. So a lot of our work is around education and kind of informing riders and meeting riders where they're at to be able to inform them of these changes and maybe not necessarily make those changes, but help them understand, okay, this is what's possible and understanding what they're willing to make happen. So as part of our survey, we were able to actually speak to over 2,000 riders from just a two-person employee organization, which I'm very, very proud of, I will say. But the strength of our survey was based and steeped off of the relationships and the strength of our partnerships with our coalition members. None of it could have been done without the involvement and the engagement of our coalition members. We hosted over about 20 in-person canvassing events, and that was done through the plethora of our coalition members' advocacy, as well as their education and their willingness to be a part of the coalition. And we made it easy for our coalition members and our community partners to be involved. We see our relationships as a back and forth and not just we coming into a community, getting what we want, and then leaving once we have that information. It's very, very important to us that we make our coalition members feel like they have been a part of the process since day one. They were part of the survey creation. They helped us identify where we wanted to conduct the survey. They actually came up with the questions, and they're part of the follow-up to the actual survey. We also provided them all the information that they needed to send out via newsletters. We printed all the postcards and flyer information for them. We offered, obviously, which is one of the most important things, which I'm going to highlight throughout my presentation the most, is compensating our volunteers and our coalition members for their time, labor, and energy to make them feel like they are part of this process, and that they are not just going to be getting information and then leaving. And we also tried to ensure that they were fully experts of the system when we hosted bi-weekly training sessions via Zoom to make sure that they were fully informed of the process and kind of what was going on. And most importantly, too, we made sure that we were meeting our volunteers where they're at, which is either at their businesses or at their community centers, but also meeting riders where they're at and not assuming and expecting that the riders are going to come to us or only be able to take our survey online. We really wanted to emphasize people to take the survey in person because we feel like that's where we can get the best kind of engagement. So I think the biggest and most important thing, which I've kind of highlighted previously, but I'm just going to kind of reiterate here, is that we really wanted to make sure that our engagement came with a lot of intentionality, and that we were going for more of a breadth over depth approach to our survey, but also our conversation with our riders. We wanted to make sure we were able to collect information that our survey maybe necessarily wasn't going to get, but be able to get anecdotal evidence that we can then bring to our transit agency, to a board meeting, or to our conversations with our transit agency. We're thankful to have a very direct line with our transit agency and that we meet sometimes with them quarterly on specific projects. So it's nice to be able to bring like anecdotal stories and kind of like more qualitative information to our transit agency that kind of give them a broader understanding of the issues. Earlier today, Leslie Richards, the general manager and CEO of SEPTA, was talking about some of the issues that her transit agency faces when it comes to homelessness. And it's a very, very large and important problem that our transit agency is currently facing. And so we have been able to partner with her in kind of getting the word out about some of the projects and programs that actually her agency is doing that a lot of riders aren't necessarily fully aware of. And a lot of that comes with these anecdotal stories that we're able to share with them, that they understand the importance and the need to kind of tackle this issue head on. The other sort of things that we did that we really wanted to make sure we were kind of being there for the community too was acknowledging that, you know, being able to speak the language of the community and not feel like I said, we were just coming in, getting what we needed, and then immediately kind of leaving like that. Obviously, we could only do as much as we really could, being a two-person employee organization. I think one of the big things for our organization that we wish we could have done was actually being able to pay the riders for their time to take our survey. I think a lot of communities and a lot of riders these days are overburdened with surveys and overburdened with information. And the things like survey fatigue are very, very real. So being able to actually pay riders to take our survey, paying for their time and paying for their energy was something I think we wish we really could have done. And that kind of goes hand in hand with this idea of a dignity-infused community engagement process, which is a method and a practice that was created by Dr. Destiny Thomas of the Thrivance Group, who used to work for LADOT. It's essentially having members of the community being paid almost like paid staff members to do outreach, to do engagement, and are part of the process from beginning to end. And then lastly, too, obviously, I think our organization wish we could have been able to hire more full-time staff to be able to actually organize volunteers and organize survey writers.
Thank you, Yasha. A quick round of applause, hand for Yasha's Best Writer Survey. And now we're going to turn to Zack. But before we do, want to just pause and see if there are any specific questions for Yasha and his project from the audience. Great. We'll come back to questions at the end. No worries, Zack. Thank you. Take it away.
Thank you. And thank you for your work, Yasha. That was really inspiring. So my name is Zack Deutsch-Gross. I'm the policy director at Transform. We're a nonprofit that brings a climate and equity lens to transportation, housing, and land use issues in the Bay Area and across California. But the work I'll be talking about today is actually my previous work with San Francisco transit riders, organizing riders and engaging community around transit service restoration in San Francisco during the pandemic. So in response to the pandemic, SFMTA, the transit agency that manages Muni, the transit service in San Francisco, dramatically scaled back their transit service from 89 lines across the city to just 17. The lines that were cut represented over 100,000 daily boardings pre-pandemic, and as you might imagine, left many riders stranded. But what I think is impressive within how SFMTA cut this service and important to think about is that they really led with equity, values, and metrics in what service they kept in order to maintain social distancing, to manage the ongoing operator crisis and fiscal crisis, and ensure that during the pandemic, essential trips were made. And so as you can see on the map on the right side of the slide, the service that was maintained centered both high frequency and maintaining lines in equity priority communities in San Francisco. So equity priority communities are communities that are vulnerable or marginalized. They can often contain higher concentrations of people that are low income, people of color, seniors, people with disabilities, and limited English proficiency. So prioritizing these communities within these kind of urgent service changes was important to provide essential trips for folks who may not have the option of a car or other transportation options. Nevertheless, the scale back of number of routes led to significant impacts for riders. And so very early on in the pandemic, we began engaging with riders to let them know about these very big service changes and make sure that they could take them for essential trips. So we met riders where they're at, as Yasha brought up, at bus stops, at food pantries, where folks were getting COVID boosters and vaccines, to really give them information about these route changes. And unfortunately, what we heard, especially early on in the pandemic, was that riders weren't always as informed of these service cuts. We heard stories of folks who were waiting 2 to 3 hours at a bus stop for a bus that would never come because it had been suspended. And so that community outreach and engagement was really important, and a way where outside advocates like myself can partner with the agency in times of crises and not in times of crises to make sure that riders are informed about these changes and centered and able to use the services. Throughout this engagement, and we continue to engage with riders throughout the pandemic, we handed out free masks to riders, both to encourage safety for everyone riding the bus, and also it just was an easy way for us to get a sense of what their experience was and encourage them to stop and engage with us in this experience. We also partnered closely with labor. TWU Local 250A is the operator union that drives the buses in San Francisco. And we all know that these operators were risking their health and safety to provide essential trips and services during the pandemic. So through our Masks for Muni campaign, we were able to provide timely PPE to operators to support these essential trips, building collaboration with labor and riders. Not only was this important for kind of our later advocacy efforts, but it also gave us a really good sense of what was happening on the ground. Often our operators are the first public information officer riders interface, and we're corroborating a lot of what we're hearing about riders not being sure about these changes, not clear if their bus was running, and that partnership was, again, really essential to informing and supporting riders. So by the early part of 2021, SFMTA was able to expand service beyond that those 17 initial lines. Again, using equity values and metrics to support riders and create a service plan that met folks' needs. So by May 2021, over 90% of San Franciscans were within 2 to 3 blocks of transit, and 100% of folks in equity priority communities were in 2 to 3 blocks of transit. And unfortunately, while this plan was guided by SFMTA's values of equity and hopefully meeting the needs of riders, it was at this point where those plans were unfortunately diverging a lot from what we were hearing the needs of riders were. So I want to call out one route in particular, the 31 Balboa, which runs through the Tenderloin neighborhood in San Francisco. The 31 pre-pandemic had 9% of its riders self-identify as disabled, about twice the number of your average bus in San Francisco, and over 80% of riders of the 31 made under $75,000 a year, which is about 60% AMI for a family of three in San Francisco. So it provided really essential services, but remained suspended over a year after its cut during the pandemic. And the 31 was essential to folks like James on this slide here, who really depended on the 31 for essential medical trips, for access to grocery stores, to his cardiac rehabilitation treatments, to parks and recreation, and for someone like James living in SRO in downtown San Francisco, access to those spaces, those services was essential, and he depended on the 31 for that, despite the fact that there were other buses nearby. That was the only bus he could use to access his services, and it remained suspended. This community outreach also led to stories like those of Fran Taylor. So I don't know if you all are aware of this, but San Francisco has hills, many, many hills. And so for folks like Fran, a bus line that was 2 to 3 blocks away might be up an incredibly steep hill that made it inaccessible to her. It made it inaccessible to people carrying groceries, to folks with strollers. And this is, again, where there's dissonance between like equity-based principles that and service planning that looks great on a map may not always align with community need. And that dissonance is where good community engagement and that trust is really important. And unfortunately, not only did that service plan not always meet the needs of riders like Fran and James in the Tenderloin, but for many folks, it perpetuated a history where marginalized communities are actively ignored, marginalized, or disinvested in when it comes to transit planning and decision making. So that for folks in the Tenderloin, seeing the 31 not be restored despite their outcry perpetuated this legacy of harm that they perceived in the transit system. And into the words of Jaime Valoria, community organizer in Tenderloin, the fact that equity metrics and the word equity was used to justify not returning the 31 Balboa, the line they really needed, was a real slap in the face and broke the trust between the community and the agency that was hoping to serve that community. And so this is where we as outside advocates can help support the agency to build that trust. Because we had done that community engagement throughout the pandemic, we were able to mobilize riders to call for service restoration. We were able to lift up the stories of Fran, of James, of Jaime, and others to push city officials to restore service. We collected petitions, we held rallies at City Hall and at major transit stops, again, meeting riders where they're at and calling attention to these suspended lines. We worked with local elected officials to hold public hearings and hosted community meetings across the city to align riders and operators together around service restoration. And I want to call out this last bullet in particular, because when we talk about service planning with limited resources, it can often be a zero-sum game that pits community against community, neighborhood against neighborhood when it comes to where we should be investing, restoring, or expanding service. But because we had done the work in deep community engagement, building the trust between different riders and neighborhoods across the city, we were able to have this solidarity calling for service restoration that otherwise would have splintered our work. So I'm proud to say that by August 2021, we had got the 31 restored. And by November that year, SFMTA had committed to restoring almost every route pre-pandemic. But what I want to leave you all with here is my call for hope, my optimism about where this work goes from here. So right now in San Francisco, we are still going strong with this rider organizing work. But moving the framing from a more reactive campaign around service restoration to a proactive campaign that talks about service expansion and the funding needed to support service expansion. So not only are residents now calling for the agency to be responsive to their needs, but they're also calling for investment in our transit service that the city direly needs. And starting to work proactively with the SFMTA, the transit agency, to identify investment needed to restore service. And I think that's where we can start rebuilding that trust and through good community engagement build power that supports the transit agencies and the riders themselves. That's it.
Thank you, Zach. I particularly, as a board member, we look at maps all the time. Like every board meeting is maps and charts and graphs. And I particularly love that line, like more than lines on a map. Because it does speak to what Paige said earlier, that we are, this is people-centered work. I want to shift now from community advocates, community-based nonprofit organizations into city agencies, public, an actual transit agency, and the work that you all did with your Better Bus project in the city of Durham.
Great. Thanks for having us again, Sharla, and it's a pleasure to be here for the city of Durham. I'm Evian Patterson, Assistant Transportation Director. I do want to acknowledge our mayors here, that's who just yelled out, our mayor and the chair of our county commission. The power of having leadership with you, along with you in transportation, is very important. And it's great that they're here. We're going to talk about engaging the community partners. I'm sorry, introduce Paige Dickerhoof as well, who is our consultant on the project from VHB. She and I will be tag teaming this discussion and talking about engaging community through community partners. You know, the really key objectives of the community partners program is to really focus on investing in community partners and digging in our city budgets to pay for engagement. As we heard earlier, you know, the importance of building trust with communities that are underrepresented and unserved is important throughout this process, and making sure that they have the capacity to advocate for themselves. And we also are looking at how we formalize these relationships, really creating a business with in a consultant client relationship with community partners. So they're really a part of the process from early on and throughout the whole process. And then, you know, we're dealing with communities that are new to our processes, don't know transportation as well as we do as professionals. So taking our time to educate so we can empower the partners that we work with. Community partners are usually are local groups that we're bringing into the planning process early on. These are members of communities from you know, marginalized parts of the city, mostly from our Black and Brown communities. These are folks who have been doing the work already, but may not know much about transportation, may not know much about transit. The planning process, we wanted to make sure we bring them in early and give them a seat at the table to look at our designs, to tell us about their experience, to peek behind the curtain, see how engineers and planners do their work, and then inform some of the decisions that they've been left out from previously. And then we're also asking community partners to help us in leading the engagement. You know, they are the resource. They are the ones that we come to when we're asking to take surveys. Well, actually, how about you tell us how we can engage better and lead that for us in this process? This model comes from the City of Durham's Equitable Engagement Blueprint, which is a guidebook and standards that we embody throughout all agencies in the city. And the reason why Paige is here, we also expect our consultants to take on to understand the blueprint as well, and why it's important to engage with intentionality, as was mentioned before. Last year, we have funded about over 80 community events and have awarded $230,000 in community grants to groups to hold these events. And one of the projects that we're going to talk about is the Better Bus project that Paige is going to walk you through. Mm-hmm. And I'll come back and tell you how the community partners got involved in that process as well.
Yes, so the Better Bus project, rather frankly, a program. It was huge. It was a behemoth of undertaking, had 5 individual projects. And I'll go through each of these a little bit more, but they were, as you can see, bus access, bus speed and reliability, the Durham Station Transit Zone, Fayetteville Street Corridor, and then the Holloway Street Corridor and Village Transit Center. So the first two were really system-wide. They were for the entirety of the city of Durham, and bus access, which was one that the community partners played a very vital role in, was really looking at how we can make your trip to the bus stop more connected. You know, we know if 90% of your trip there is safe, but 10% is not, that 10% is really going to speak more loudly to you than the 90% that was comfortable. So we want to make sure the community is connected, and that's through sidewalk improvements, that's through enhanced ADA accessibility requirements, that's making sure that you're comfortable on your whole trip there. And then that also looks at not only your trip to the bus stop, but your comfortability at the bus stop. So making sure that bus stops have the appropriate accommodations, the appropriate amenities, because that's all part of equity. You should feel comfortable at a bus stop, and you should feel comfortable getting to the bus stop. And like I said, community partners were a huge part of that. We needed their help to really traverse the whole city, and they were part of how we could reach out to people, really understanding, you know, data can show where the problems are, but sometimes people really know, and that doesn't show up all the time in our maps. So they were vital. The next was bus speed and reliability, and in layman's terms, that was how long are you waiting on the bus, and how long is your ride on the bus to your next destination. You know, if you have the ability to use a car, you expect your car to be reliable. You expect it to get you where you want it to go in the certain amount of time that you can expect. And that should also be applicable to transit. That is equitable, and that is what Durham has made clear that that is their expectation for their system. And then the next three parts of this study were really a geographic focus. And this was transit planning that was really centered on the highest ridership corridors. The city, before this project, really looked out and said, we want to make sure we are first prioritizing these places that are serving the most riders. So that first was the Durham station. That was our transit zone. That is Durham's central hub, their downtown core, serving through their station a lot of riders there. The next was the Fayetteville Street Transit Corridor. This is a very important corridor in the city. It's home to an HBCU, North Carolina Central University. It's home to numerous community staples. It's home to a high school, and is really, really important as far as the legacy of Durham. It has a lot of character that we wanted to celebrate in this. And then along with the Holloway Street Transit Corridor, that is a key connector into the heart of Durham. It has a lot of community staples. It looks very different. It has a lot of commercial use. It has single family homes, and again, rich culture. And that's why our community partners that we chose were some community partners that existed along these corridors, because they understood the cultural implications. They understood the importance of these corridors in the city's history, and we wanted that to be modeled in all of our work going forward. But the overall goal for these corridors was to provide just a better overall experience. So that means that we looked at the bus access here, again, making sure your trip to the bus stop was clean, safe, and comfortable. We looked at the bus speed and reliability on these corridors. We looked at bus stop improvements, really making these corridors the example for Durham transit moving forward. And then we also looked at just how we can incorporate, again, that history, keeping the beautiful parts of Durham that make it what it is, and maintaining that along that system. And next, as I said, those community partners are a huge part of those just relationships on that corridor, which Evian will talk more about.
So currently we have 6 community partners. We've had 2 cohorts, but now we have 6 that are geographically dispersed throughout the city. That gives us, diverse opinions about the experience of using the bus. They're also ethnically diverse from our Black and Brown communities, especially from our historic Black communities, as Paige was mentioning. On Fayetteville Street is home to Hayti, the district that is has historical significance to the city, and one that we want to make sure we maintain its character and provide character in a high ridership and high use corridor, this planning, we should be working on building the character out for that the area as well. We wanted to make sure the community partners, as I mentioned, were involved early on. This, again, I was mentioning about giving them a seat at the table, but not only the seat at the table, but leading the survey collection, leading the talking to their communities that they work with, giving us opinions and informing us and humbling us really on how we're going to carry out the planning process for the entirety. And they've been along the same time. The other thing is what the community partner program is really about centering joy and sponsoring the community partners in their hosting events where they are already engaging with their population and community, and we show up and set up a table, provide information, answer questions, have our boards talk about the experience, get that quality information that you don't really catch in a survey. And like I said, it's one of the most humbling experiences when you think that you're going out with the right ideas, and then somebody will stop you and tell you, well, hold up, sir.
Mhm.
This is how it happens, how our experience waiting on the bus in this area. Or I know somebody who couldn't get to the bus because there was a sidewalk gap. And did the information capture that? And make sure we get that the intensity and it's intentional with us participating in those events. We also ask our community partners to participate on our engagement committee, to actually be the key stakeholders on the engagement committee, to tell us how we're engaging, and here are some tips for you. Here's how you develop your flyers, the information that goes out to our community members. These are the questions that they ask, is the information that they want to see. They also help us build this online engagement. I don't know if you've seen a resemblance to this cartoon character up there, but it's an animation that we put out online to help explain the Better Bus Project and why it's important to their communities. Just reiterating why formalizing these processes in partnership is important. We have to do our business, transportation business and planning differently now. We have to, instead of using the buzzword of equity, we have to actually be intentional in getting in those communities, finding folks to work with, paying them for their valuable time to take time to work with us. We're all getting paid to be there, so should they. We're also investing in people and not in products, not in surveys. We want a long-term partnership because it's not about just this project, the Better Bus Project. It's really about the transportation experience and other projects and programs that come down the line. Some of the greatest outcomes I found is when you have a community partner tell you about, we have prioritized issues in our community, and now we have a list to provide you. And now we have to respond to that. That's the beauty of engaging and providing those tools. It's important for everyone in this room to understand your community that you're working in and the harmful decisions that transportation has made and the impacts it's made on the communities. You cannot build trust without acknowledging that. We have an opportunity to reimagine infrastructure, while acknowledging this the past and really building for the future with the community partners. I cannot stress enough in your engagement, take time to educate and bring them along in the process, to talk about here's how transportation procedures and processes work. We're in program development, we're in planning. The next will be design, final design, and then into construction. The reason why you want them there then is because when we come back for the construction phase, you have linkages and advocates on your side, hopefully, who will tell the community, oh, I was there, I was at the table, I saw them, I saw what was coming up in the whole time. And really, as mentioned again, it's increasing their capacity. And also a lesson we've learned is, you want to make sure that they're throughout the entire process. They're in the beginning, then a middle, and then an end. Right now, we're finishing our deliverables on the project, and we have issued another round of survey to go back and say to ask the community, did we get it right? Did we follow up? Did we answer your concerns? Do you see that on the plan? Here is the plan. And if it's not there, then we've done you a disservice. So thank you. We're happy to answer any questions.
So we'll pause there for just that. Questions. Sarah, if we have any questions from the audience, the virtual audience, and Leah, if we have any questions from our in-person audience.
Sorry, this is general questions? Perfect. Thank you for the lights. All right, I have a question from Josh Stock, who's our virtual attendee from Dialogue Design. Question for Zack. It's unclear to me if the publishing of data like 91% of residents are within X distance to transit is helpful or harmful. These metrics are often not reflective of the reality on the ground. The steep hill issue noted was an excellent point, or various times of day, and often become a talking point for decision makers to say something like, oh, that area is served by transit and stop trying as hard to improve the network. What would be a better way to communicate transit service coverage so we can get better outcomes?
That's a great question. Thank you. So I would say that metrics like coverage are necessary and not sufficient in describing the transit situation. I think that we should be critical and continue to reflect on like what are the metrics we're using? Are they reflective of community needs? And ideally start that planning process in the beginning where the community is defining what those metrics and how what metrics are important to them, so that they are meaningful. But then I think we know we have to go beyond metrics, and that's where the stories, the anecdotes, and the community engagement becomes really important. So I don't think it's a simple answer of yes metrics, no metrics, but really making sure you're intentional about telling the full story and using both data and narrative to share that with decision makers. And again, you're not going to be able to do that without centering the communities that you're serving.
I'd also love to add to that too. I think Zack raises a really good point. And I think, yeah, access to transit, but where is transit taking you? I think like I was saying from the beginning, public transit intersects so many other forms of healthy community development. So is public transit taking you to school centers? Is it taking you to community centers? Is it taking you to the library? Is it taking you to the hospital, right? Is it taking you where you need to go? And what is the nearest stop towards what's the proximity of a stop towards a hospital, access to healthcare, access to education, employment, obviously, I think are just as important and just as big.
We have a question from the audience.
Yes, hi. I'm Maria Zimmerman with the U.S. Department of Transportation, and this was a great panel and so many good examples. I'm curious, we released just a couple weeks ago a new guidelines for meaningful public involvement, and we're working to clarify how federal funds can be used to support community-based organizations in doing this work. And I'm curious for the work in Durham or any of the others, if there were funds that were provided through the efforts you provided or other examples, because I think the more that we can kind of normalize and show how this work really is essential to being able to do this type of work, it helps us all. So I'm curious if you have any examples of that.
Sure. Yeah, I'll speak of one of our community partners on Fayetteville Street, who have increased the capacity to the point that they are now seeking those opportunities from the U.S. government to support technical assistance, to support their planning efforts. And so there's an interest there. There's interest there. Now, there are lots of rules and processes for getting a U.S. government grant. So we've actually had to take time to walk her through, putting together documents, getting letters of support, the things that we have to do for putting grants together, grant applications together. I think is a wonderful opportunity for community groups to come into the federal process and to gain the access because that helps in building their capacity as well. You know, again, they're building out their prioritizations and are able to bring it to us, and we can respond with projects better. So I hope that answers your question.
One more question for the audience.
Oh, hi, I'm Duncan Huang. I'm from Portland and I work for Metro. And it seems like y'all are doing some really excellent community engagement. But what happens when the community, brings up other topics like my rent is too dang high, or I want to see a park here. I don't really care that much about improving transit. Like, how do you work with, partner agencies, or like, I guess, what do you do when that's what you're hearing is like, transit's not my number one thing, but, work on housing or something.
I guess I'm the only government person up here, I guess. We hear it all the time. We want to make the connections and be resources for our communities, community members, to make sure that their comments are taken back and taken to the right folks, but it gets lost in the sauce. So actually, something that our partner agency, the Neighborhood Improvement Services, have established a tool to gather those the other requests simply by recording the information, and as a data tool that will catalog if you heard about housing, if you heard about transportation, public works, and it is a recording where residents can see where their comments were analyzed and spat out, and then it can go to the government agencies. We're testing that tool right now. So, we're rolling it out with other projects, but it's important that once we hear it, we're not just saying it's not my area. It's really, how can I get you the resource and link you to the folks to talk to? And some of our community partners have taken that and run with it. The one that I've talked about, the ones who are prioritized and say, okay, since you said that was public works, we're going to have public works at our next monthly meeting along with transportation. So both y'all can answer about that. That's the power of that process.
I'd also like to add, I think one role that we as a transit advocacy coalition kind of play are this sort of middle person or like liaison between the city and our transit agency, right? I think in order for us to have an effective and kind of sustainable, but also working transit system, the city and the agency have to be working together in tandem. And sometimes obviously their priorities different. Sometimes they're like, we'll go to them with a problem and be like, well, they'll be like, oh, that's the city, or oh no, that's on the agency, right? And I think one role that we like to play is actually kind of being like a little bit of like a mediator and trying to either, there's no issues within our city of getting them in the same room or anything like that, but sometimes trying to get them on the same on board. And sometimes too, that's also making them look bad, in the press and being like, look, okay, well, if you're not going to work together, we're going to, put the blame on both of y'all. And then that kind of gets them to work together. But I think that ultimately the whole key is the partnerships, right? Of the agencies themselves, both within the city and the transit agency, and their ability to work close to each other and understand that, like, yeah, these things are so interconnected and intertwined and intersect each other that you can't separate them from each other.
Yeah, and I would just say, we often hear like transit isn't my number one issue, but my response is often, sure, but I can guarantee you it's connected to your number one issue. And it is our job as policymakers, as representatives, as government employees, to draw those connections out and make those connections explicit. So one example is we were doing survey work in the Bayview talking about drawing the connections between air quality and increased transportation and environmental justice. But over and over in our survey, the top issue folks were coming to us with was jobs. And it was on us to reframe kind of our engagement in that community, to draw the connections between transit and good paying jobs. And then specifically, transit agencies across the country are facing operator or hiring crises. And there was a clear opportunity when we reframed our own analysis to make those connections explicit between the fact that our agencies needed employees to run their service, and that this community wanted good, high-paying union jobs. And so I think we should challenge ourselves to make those connections explicit and not just get stumped when somebody says, no, I don't care about transit.
From the private end, I'll add to that, that issue, I see it in almost every community I work in, every agency, that siloed of, well, thank you for that information, but we don't really know what to do with that. Where, you know, the community sees you as one entity. They don't see you as, well, this department handles this work, this department handles this work. They see you as the city. So you are who they go to for those issues. And so to build that trust that you want, you have to start that change inside your own agency, a change of culture that we are public servants and I'll make it happen. However, I can best respond to you. I want to make sure that you know we're working on your behalf and we will get you the answer that you need. And I'll follow up with whoever I need to get that answer. It really starts from inside the culture out, that culture of helpfulness. And that's how people are going to continue to trust your agency.
And I think it goes to an earlier conversation in the panel about healthy communities are connected communities. And the deeper we are aware of and connected throughout the community, right? Like this, and I hear the conversation around agencies and the community, but then like, who are all the players in the community and how deeply are we aware of the vast amount of resources that our individual communities hold. And Paige, to your point, like it starts internally, right? And so how we've got to, as professionals, as the people that folks have access to, ensure that we are fully and sufficiently aware of all the various resources that are available in our communities so that anybody can start to be that mediator, that convener that says, it's not us, it's them. Let me connect you very directly. And I think that this is not an issue that is exclusive to transit. Trust me, I work in public education. It is an issue that we see in public education. I have a good friend who works in healthcare. It's an issue that they see in healthcare. And I think it speaks to the disconnectedness in all of our communities and the challenge, the opportunity that we have in our respective contexts to address that to whatever the maximum degree that we can.
Another audience question.
Good morning, panelists. My name is Veli, and the question that I have actually goes really perfectly in hand with the comment that you made, Paige. And so I'm wondering, before the Better Bus Project, before the community-centered work begins, how do, and any one of the panelists, please feel free to speak to this, how do you get we know that the city is comprised of different departments. How do you get people internally to be on board to center community in all the work that they do? Because as Mr. Patterson, you said, it takes a lot of humility to go back and change the decisions that you've maybe made, the designs that you've already worked on. So what does that look like? If you can speak to maybe what internally you have done, the processes that it may take, the conversations that may need to be held to get everyone internally to be on board. So whenever the comments and the changes come or the community provides the feedback, it is well received.
Man, I love that question.
Well, I'll start with, I think in Durham, the city was intentional by creating the equitable engagement blueprint. It is a guide, like I said, it's a guidebook of standards. So this is how you are to govern yourselves in the community. And so that's across every agency. And we are expected from top down to point back to what we've learned from that guidebook and follow it. And we start on that baseline. Good to have a standard practice. Before Better Bus Project, we were still out in communities and we're still hearing the same thing. You either go back and not react to it or send an email and say, you need to answer this. But I think we have been meeting a lot more because our projects are overlapping. One of the in Hayti, I was speaking about a minute ago, it's positioned just west or southwest of the downtown, across a freeway that cut through the Black community. Talk all about that. But it was important. Everyone's all interested in it now. We have a project, community development has a project, developers are coming, everyone wants to be there. So we've actually been forced into the room together to talk about how we are going to, see our projects through on a schedule, coordinate across our agencies, and really how we're going to work with the community so that we reduce the confusion and the conflict and really bring them into a process, because that's what the guidebook told us to do.
Yeah, and from as a consultant to the city has made very clear, this is our expectation for anybody working with us, that this equitable engagement blueprint is the basis for engagement. And so when that is very clear to your partners, the people you're hiring, you've done a great job. And Durham has done that. And especially having leadership top down, again, that has said, this is a priority, has been key.
I'll add from, I feel like Evian and Paige are kind of talking from like the carrot standpoint. I'm going to talk from the stick standpoint.
That's good.
Never underestimate the power of a community member calling their city council member and derailing a project.
Yes.
So many times, you can have the data, you can have everything set in place, but if a handful of community members are not happy about a bus lane in front of their house and what it's going to quote unquote attract, right? I think if you're able to kind of, I think for the city of Philadelphia specifically, they are very, very intentional, and it's very, very important that they're getting community input and community feedback so that they don't end up doing a project and then the community comes back and says, I had no idea about this. Why did you do this? You didn't come and talk to me about it. Now I'm going to go make, things really difficult for you. And city council, all, their main priority is obviously making their constituents happy. So I think there's a power in that community that I think, agencies can really recognize.
We have another audience question.
Thank you, everyone. Wendy Zorano, also from Portland, Oregon, and I currently work for the city of Portland in the Bureau of Transportation, but previously I worked for TriMed, which was our transportation agency. So just curious, I think we've been in this topic of community engagement, and I think a lot of us have gotten the message that we got to center community, especially community-based organizations, to do this work and to build capacity within our communities. But I think we haven't really gotten to the point of like, okay, how do we bring in like narrative, and how do we let people know how we made our decisions and how we centered that knowledge and getting to something like a Better Bus project or something into like, this is how we arrived at this decision as an entity because of the feedback you gave us. I've noticed we are very dialed into the quantitative, but when it comes to the qualitative, how do you take that focus group and what you heard in that focus group to inform and carry heavy weight into the final decision of a project, or whether or not you do access management, or whether or not you put the bus station outside this house versus the one next door. I think sometimes, I'll be, honest, we within the government can be taking advantage of like what politically is also more resilient. And I think we just have a little bit of learning to do on how do we hold ourselves accountable and create processes to actually ground community engagement as we've done with quantitative information or technical analysis. And so I'm curious to hear if that's already happening within projects like this, or within the partners, the community-based organizations are already working with.
I can start. So I think it starts with your intention with community engagement. That I think we all know that community engagement should never just be a checkbox or political cover to support your project or your preconceived notion. But I would actually push back on community engagement and thinking about community engagement on the project specific level. I think that we should be thinking about whole communities and how they're connected to other transit projects, to housing, to land use, to jobs, to have a fuller narrative like you're talking about. And so if we approach community engagement as a way to build trust, to build long-term engagement rather than project-specific engagement, we're able to better incorporate those narratives and ensure that the community feels heard and seen, both in the context of the project and how that fits their broader needs. But that takes time and resources and trust and intention.
Another audience question.
I am Laura Bender. I'm with the city of Charlotte. I'm wondering, kind of looking at community engagement, and when you're trying to do work to center marginalized communities and disenfranchised communities, on the city side, we're public servants, right? We serve the entire city. And so a lot of the work that we're doing is trying to figure out, how do we get to those voices that aren't usually at the table? How do we bring them in? And my question is more about, so for those usual suspects who always show up and then say, well, why aren't you paying attention to me anymore? Or, and may have the power and ability to derail projects. Do you have lessons learned that you could share about that?
A huge one is going to the public versus them coming to you, being, as we've seen through this project, just at the events that they already have. I think that builds a level of trust, because you've come to them, you've come to their culture, you've come to their world, and you're saying, I'm willing to be here to hear what you say. I didn't ask you to come find me at a random public meeting on a Monday night that's hard to get to, that I have to get childcare for. So that has been huge. And I think in engagement, being creative and not just having the status quo of, well, we just have a board, we just have a presentation, we ask what people think, but being creative and saying, let's get people engaged in different ways. And there's been research behind engaging people with their hands versus their mouths. It usually de-triggers them when they are sitting across the table from their neighbor talking about these issues. It's harder for that person that's usually, like you mentioned, your common culprit. It's harder for them to be upset about a change when their neighbor is right across from them expressing why they need that form of transportation. So really engaging in different ways that are not the status quo is very important.
I'll also add to, and I apologize if I'm interrupting. I think ensuring that the people you're inviting to like a round table, right, that they look around that table and they see people who look like them and, feel like them, and that there isn't, wherever possible, kind of breaking down the hierarchy of, whether it's like accolades or education or, power. I think for us, community organizing is a distribution of power, and it's redistributing the power that we as an organization have, that our agency has maybe given us, back to the community so that they can be a direct line. And so I think it's ensuring that the people at that table look like the community, speak the language of the community, are from the community. And I think, like what Paige said, meeting the community where they're at, I think there is so much power to in like leaders of communities, especially in like religious institutions, right? They have so much reach and so much power. Meeting them where they're at, I think is always is a direct and easy way.
I'll answer as well from the city perspective. We deal with this a lot now, where we've gone to communities that are usually, we've usually been called to, who are expecting us to, answer their questions. Now we call it death by 10,000 service requests. But what we've started to do now is to show those communities, let me show you some data. Here are the improvements that have happened in this community over the last 5 years. And here are the improvements in the other. And look, what's the balance here? There's an imbalance. So we're actually focusing on the imbalance. It took us this long to get there, unfortunately, but this is what this is our intention. We'll get to you. That speed bump or that pothole is on the schedule, and the schedule, we follow that with Public Works. But we're also focusing on addressing sidewalk gaps in a Black community, addressing people standing in mud pits and grass waiting for the bus, where you have beautiful tree lined streets in yours. You know, you really have to put them on the spot, and then they relent from there.
Following this theme of common culprits, I would love for you all to share like some of your best practices for identifying community stakeholders, identifying partners. I think that we sometimes think in terms of, oh, we know the big church in the neighborhood and that's an easy target, or, oh, we know the school board president, that's an easy person for us to connect with. But what about the lesser known, hidden, invisible partners? How have you all identified, connected with them, and built trust for the purpose of these really significant projects in this work?
I'll start again. Sorry to be talking so much, but
That's why you're here.
The Community Partners Program is a call for proposals to the community, where the Neighborhood Improvement Services runs this process where we put out an RFP for community groups, and it's a way to gather the information of the organizations that are out there who are interested in working with the government. They have an exhausted list. They come to the pre-proposal meetings, just like we all do. You know, in the last few years, been virtual meetings, so we get some information from there, and then the ones who are interested will propose. From there, once we select community partners, we ask community partners to help us identify others, because they're the ones who have links to the community already. We've been talking on the project of building the stakeholder registry as we're closing out this planning portion, to say who are the folks that we worked with and we talked with, and those are the folks we're going to follow up with throughout the entirety.
And I call this like my FBI work. It's like, you know, you start with one, like maybe a church, like those stakeholders you can see, and then you go to them and you just keep asking questions. You just keep digging. Okay, well, who might lead like this particular group of people? How can I reach this particular group of people? And they end up knowing, and that's how you build that registry. That, of course, you want to maintain as a community. It should not be project specific. It should be programmatic. It should be long lasting, that you make those relationships. And through this project, it was just boots on the ground conversations with transit riders. And you know them by name. You know what bus they ride. You know what their favorite candy is, because we're giving it out. And that's how you build those formal relationships, where you meet more of those leaders that you want to know.
Yeah, I really think it's about what can I offer to my coalition member or a community prior to coming to approach them. Sometimes that's something monetary, right? Sometimes it's, hey, we would love to be able to provide you with this $1,000 mini grant application, just to be a part of our coalition, just to attend our meetings, just to have a representative, right? And from there, being able then to kind of build out, specific either projects or specific programs that both interest our organization as a whole and their organization.
Yeah, the first question, or the question I always make sure to ask in any conversations, who else should I be talking to? And really not assuming and entering community that you are the knowledge holder, that you understand who represents who, but just being transparent and asking the questions and following up. The other thing I'll say is there are established institutions that we want to work with, but then there are also your everyday writers. And we shouldn't forget about doing leadership development work to lift them up into being leaders in their own right. So a survey is not your endpoint with somebody, it's the beginning of how you engage with them. And so even in this survey development, I'm always thinking about, how am I following up with these people? What is my approach? Where is this going? So that part of that compensation is making sure that you value their time and showing that by providing next steps, follow-up opportunities, and the intention that comes with that.
Really being transparent about what you're going to do with that information in that survey afterwards. prior to even asking them the questions. I think you can get a lot more engagement and a lot more feedback when a person knows from beginning to end what is going to be done with this information and why they're participating.
If we don't have any other audience questions, I do have a final question that I'd like to pose for each of you to respond to. I don't know about you, but I go to lots of conferences and, get lots of information. And then there's the now what. What's your now what for the people in the audience today, whether they're planners, whether they're designers, developers, at public agencies? What is the call to action for the folks who are joining us both online and in this room today? What do they need to leave here and do?
Sure, I can start. I think that communities are your greatest resource. That we want to move beyond an antagonistic relationship between communities and developers, between agencies and writers, but really entering those conversations as these are people you get to work with to make your city, your region better, and entering conversations with that framing rather than being scared that it won't go well, that you'll commit a faux pas, that it will hurt your project. Really leaning into doing the work and leveraging the communities you're engaging with.
I think for me, it is asking yourself, what is my intention with this project, this survey, this outreach, this engagement? And I think, coming in as on the same level and not as coming in as an expert into the community. I think you come into a community with a little bit of humility. I think a lot of compassion and care and understanding for community and their needs. And with an open book for it to be filled, you can get a lot of those pages filled out. And then lastly, I think I've reiterated maybe 3 or 4 times now, compensating people for their time, energy, and labor, especially communities. Even if from the smallest, survey to focus groups, I promise you that people will come back. Those people will give you all the information you want to hear.
A few key takeaways is engage early. And if you think it's early, it's not early enough. Really change your mindset about, especially from the private side, when in your scope and schedule, they should be included, the community, because it really should be from the get-go. And from the public side, like City of Durham has done, formalizing that process, formalizing engagement, making it organizationally. They have their own department that handles those relationships. They have their own RFP system that does that really has formalized that this is important to us and this will go before the technical work. And then organizationally prioritizing that, if you're on the private side, making sure that often public engagement is just the add-on to your scope. Make it that your organization has people dedicated to public engagement, dedicated to really looking at things creatively and not just going with the status quo, because when you leave things till the end, you're left with, okay, we just got to get this done, the status quo, and then you do a disservice to the community that you're going to.
It's great being on the panel with folks that like-minded and we're all preaching the same word. It's great. But I want to reiterate what Yasha said, public agency folks here, dig in your pockets, create a budget line for community engagement. Find people in your departments to focus on that. It's powerful. It's a powerful narrative now to hear when you go out to the communities and they hear that you have devoted resources to assuring that we have effective communication and engagement with community. It's really powerful in Durham, and I find it personally powerful to me when you go out to members and they say, wow, you get it. I'm still working on it. I don't get everything, but I'm here to learn. But I'm taking my time to work with you because your time is valuable, and we got to compensate.
Because if it's not funded, it's not getting finished.
That's right.
Thank you all to our panelists. Thank you, Zack. Thank you, Yasha. Thank you, Paige and Evian. Thank you for you all's engagement today, for leaning into the conversation. I hope that the experiences and the expertise that they shared with you today is going to be valuable in your work moving forward, to really, really engage and support your communities in very meaningful ways. You know how to reach them. If you don't, find them in the speaker section of the program, reach out to them. I'm sure that they would love to engage further. I'm going to answer any further questions you have about centering community partners in decisions, design, and development. Thank you all.
Thank you, Sharla.